Didn't realize that you could get 6 points on your driving license for using your mobile phone at a drive-through? Then please do watch this video and I'll save you a lot of heartache, especially if you've already got 6 points, which means you'll wrap up to 12 points, which means the court is obliged to ban you for a minimum period of 6 months unless you can show exceptional hardship, which is not as easy as it sounds. So let's wind back to the beginning and explain why I'm talking about it. So there's a bit of a debate popped up on X today about a drive-through being private land. Now, you might recall from a previous video that I did, if you don't, go back and watch it, where I discussed lots of different cases about what is or is not public spaces, as opposed to just being private land. Now, a lot of people confuse private premises, private land with a public place, a public space. Now, just because it's private land doesn't mean it's not a public place, because a public place is really just anywhere that the public generally have access to. So, for example, if there's a barrier in place and the premises is closed, then that is not likely to be a public place because the public are not supposed to have access to it. However, if it's a premises and it's closed but there's no barrier, then case law has held that that is still a public place for the purposes of road traffic offences. So what does this have to do with the drive-through? Well, of course, most drive-throughs are going to be private land, but they are still a public place. So if the public generally have access to it, it is considered to be a road for the purposes of all road traffic offences. In particular, Regulation 110, and for that matter, Regulation 109, which a few people have emailed me about. One person took the time to write to me about, so I'll come back to that in a moment. It does have its place, but it's probably not quite so relevant as Regulation 110. Regulation 110, for those that are not aware, is pretty much anything you can think of doing with your mobile phone. Because even by illuminating the screen, even if you've got it in your hand and you've done nothing else with it, save for illuminate the screen, you are already in breach of Regulation 110, meaning you'll get 6 points and a fine just for illuminating the screen. Now, a lot of you now will jump up and say, well, you can use it at a drive-through. That is correct, but only in a very specific way. Two specific ways, really, but let's deal with them in turn. The first is a genuine emergency. That is under the subsection 5 of Regulation 110, which has to be a genuine emergency. You've got to be acting in response to that genuine emergency, and it's got to be unsafe and impractical for you to cease driving in order to make the call. So at a drive-through, if it's an emergency, even then you could arguably get out of the vehicle to make an emergency call. Now that might sound a little bit ridiculous, but it is what it is. But obviously if you're driving down the motorway and there's an emergency then and you decide to make an emergency call, it's not really practical or safe for you to pull over on the motorway to make that call, unless of course it's all clear and so on and so forth. But that's just one of the exemptions. The main exemption that we're talking about is making a contactless payment at the drive-through. Now, there's been a lot of debate over what this really means and what you can and can't do. In a nutshell, all you can do under subsection 5B in Regulation 110, 5B A, B and C, is to make a contactless payment for goods or services which are received at the same time or after this contactless payment has been made. The vehicle must be stationary and that person is using the mobile phone or the device to make the contactless payment. So in other words, you need to pull up, your vehicle needs to be stationary. Ideally, you should turn off the engine, but the regulation says stationary, and it is only to make payment for goods or services that are received at that time or immediately afterwards. And so if you're using it for any other purpose, if whilst you've just leant over and made a payment, you then decide to check your emails while you're at it and a police officer walks by, you may well find yourself with a prosecution for Regulation 110 and 6 points on your driving license. Now, how many officers are actually going to do that? Well, it depends. It depends on what you're doing with the phone. It depends on your attitude, lots of other things that come into play here, because realistically, there is some degree of discretion that the police are going to use. But ultimately, this is the risk. You should not be using your phone for anything other than that contactless payment. or, as I said earlier, a genuine emergency call. But for that, even then, it's arguable either way. Arguably, if you saw something, you just picked it up, you made the emergency call, and you didn't think about it, you just made the emergency call. If I were defending you, that's what I would say. I'd say you didn't have time to think, you saw something happen, someone being attacked, you didn't think about getting out of the vehicle, you just made the call. And it was a genuine emergency, you were acting in response to it. If I were prosecuting a case like that, I would say, well, you could just as quickly have got out of the vehicle so that you're no longer in charge of the vehicle and there's no danger to anyone else on the road and so on. So you can look at this both ways, but the regulation is clear. It has got to be a genuine emergency that you're reacting to. It's not safe or practical for you to get out of the vehicle. And the alternative is making that contactless payment. But it is only that. So the reason I do this video is because this argument popped up on X, essentially criticizing the police officer from another TikTok channel called George's Car Media, GCM. Now, what the officer said in that video was completely correct. You can only use the phone or any device such as your watch for the contactless payment and nothing else. If you do use it for anything else, you could well find yourself with 6 points and a fine, which if you've already got 6 points, either maybe 3 from a bald tire and 3 for speeding, you get another 6, you're likely to be disqualified from driving for 6 months. So I hope that will save you the heartache of going through all this. If that is the case, if you are caught doing something like this, just know that that is not allowed. The argument that it's private land and therefore not a public space, all these kind of things, they are not going to wash. Because the public have access to it, it is a public space, it is a road for the purposes of road traffic offences. That is why these regulations cover contactless payments, because the drafters had that in mind. Now, as promised, I almost forgot, coming back to Regulation 109, because many people have emailed me about it and someone even took the time to write in about it. 109 is very similar to 110 against the use of mobile phones, but 109 is in relation to television sets. But it also says television receiving apparatus or other cinematographic apparatus used to display anything other than information about the vehicle and its equipment. Because so often the argument comes up about what about the Tesla with the big screen? Well, just because the Tesla has a big screen doesn't mean you can use it just because it's not handheld. You can answer calls and things like that because it's not handheld. Arguably, it's status of the equipment of the vehicle and the vehicle and so on. But also, there's lots of other functions on it. There's the heating and air conditioning, the music, arguably, because it's part of the equipment of the vehicle, the sound system, it's part of the vehicle. But if you started browsing the internet and you started, actually it doesn't let you watch Netflix and it doesn't let you watch YouTube. And so, you know, I've had a passenger test that out when we've been driving. It doesn't let you, so that the driver can't be distracted in that way. But if you were to start browsing the internet and things like that, which is nothing to do with the state of the equipment in the vehicle, which is what this regulation sets out, because it says anything other than the state of the vehicle or its equipment, the location of the vehicle, like a sat-nav, to assist the driver to see the road adjacent to the vehicle. So obviously the Tesla and other vehicles have got a screen display of the road beside the vehicle, so you can look at that. And to assist the driver reaching his destination, which is again akin to a sat-nav, and things like that. So if you're using it to browse the internet, then obviously you're going to be in breach of Regulation 109 as well. But more properly, if you were browsing the internet in a Tesla and you were caught by the police, you're more likely to be prosecuted for careless or even dangerous driving rather than a simple breach of Regulation 109. And so likewise, if you're using a phone to watch a film, technically, in my view, I agree with the person that wrote into me, that would also very arguably fall under Regulation 109 in that it is a cinematographic display of some film or whatever, even if it's on your phone. So if you're using it, then arguably you're in breach of 109 as well. It wouldn't really be a breach of Regulation 110 if it's not in your hand because it's designed for handheld mobile phones. But again, more properly, you're likely to be prosecuted for careless driving or dangerous driving, particularly if you've had a big collision and the investigators found that you were watching something on your phone in the cradle at the time. And believe me, they can find that out. So if that's the case, you'll more likely get prosecuted for careless driving or dangerous driving. But they might throw Regulation 109 in there for good measure. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope it saves some of you from being prosecuted and being disqualified. So if that is useful to you, please do pop the like button, subscribe for more content. Enjoy your weekend, and thanks for watching.